So whenever you raise the woman question, you're going to have a chorus of guys chiming in and griping about and blaming weak men, whatever that means. Now, I think you could probably make a pretty good argument that men in general are not as strong as they need to be, not as strong of mind, not as strong of conviction, not as strong of body, whatever. And you could probably make that argument in the general form, but the thing about these gripes about weak men is they typically imply that it is the weakest men who are the source of the woman problem, the feminism problem. Like it's the, pussy whipped betas or the basement dwelling incels that are the source of this problem. And frankly, that's kind of nonsense, because these sad sacks, for the most part, are not influencing anything. They're not leading anything. They don't have the power to overrule the strong men or men in general and impose some kind of, feminist agenda or feminine imperative. They don't have that power. They're not leaders. They're not, agenda setters. They're not charting the course, so to speak. And so they're not dragging us along for the ride. So, who is? Well, I'll mention another group that gets on my nerves, but I don't think they're it either. And I'm talking about the beta orbiters who enable e-thoughtery by lavishing it with money and attention in exchange for virtually nothing. And these people, as annoying as they are, barely rise above the level of a nuisance. They are not also the source of the feminism problem, or the the problem with women being out of control and feminine imperatives run amok. But let me give you 3 examples. Well, maybe more than 3. We'll see how many we get to. So Trump stood up at the State of the Union and said a whole bunch of stuff about how happy he was and how proud all Americans can be about women in the workforce and women in Congress and all this kind of stuff. And Trump is not a weak man. He is kind of a Chad. He's kind of an alpha. He's not perfect. His daughter might have undue influence over him. And he does take some shit from, the you-know-whos. But by and large, he's not a shit taker. Like, he will hold his own. He will fight back. He is not a weak man. He's not a pushover. And he certainly doesn't hold back on women just because they're women, although that is something that women demand. All right, that's something that women demand and that they're angry that they don't get from him. But nevertheless, he will stand up and he will, basically brown nose to the female vote. He will pander to the female vote and talk about all this stuff about women in the workforce, which has been tremendously destructive. You give women alternatives to mothering and, homemaking, and there's going to be less of that. And we need that, and that's what we need from women more than anything else. So, tremendously destructive, but he gets up there and speaks its praises. And I think he's basically doing this for self-serving motives. Like, he's trying to pad his coalition going into 2020 and win back, some of the woman vote. He did take a bare majority of the white woman vote in 2016, and I think he wants to increase that margin to pad his coalition going into 2020. All right, so it seems like straightforward self-serving motive here, and he's doing it to advance his political career, basically. According to Aaron Russo, who is a former Libertarian presidential candidate, now dead, but he mentioned in an interview one time, and this is a guy who, you know, claims to be connected or claimed to be connected with like the whole Davos man set, you know, that whole milieu, and friends with one of the Rockefellers, David, I think, and he claimed that Rockefeller admitted to him that they had bankrolled feminism in the 60s, I guess, as a way of getting women into the workforce where they could be taxed, and as a way of getting, you know, control of the children younger to indoctrinate them. So here we have an elite agenda, a top-down agenda, pushing feminism for, you know, malicious and self-serving motives, you know, from the top of the hierarchy, not from the bottom of the hierarchy. It's not coming from the bottom up, it's coming from the top down, and that would be an example there. Whenever you raise the question of women in the military, because this is one of the dumbest things, you know, it's just not worthwhile having them in the military, let alone in combat units. And this is obvious to anyone with an ounce of sense, you know, because they're not physically up to it, they're not psychologically up to it, and they just cause more problems and more drama and slow everybody down, and, you know, create, you know, relationship issues and unwanted pregnancies. It's a big problem in the Navy, I know. And then there's all the sexual harassment stuff and the you know, rape allegations, a lot of which is probably true, but like if they weren't there, they wouldn't be getting raped. You know, you have to feminize all the institutions at every level, and it's just counterproductive, especially for the military, right? So there's no good reason for them to be there. They get injured at high rates. You know, mixed units are less effective than all male units across the board. Like, the data is overwhelming, and there's no good reason for them to be there. But anytime you bring this up, you know, you're going to get some guy chiming in saying, yeah, I was in the military and I'd go into combat with, you know, some of the women in my unit, you know, way before you. And look, I've never been in the military. I'm not qualified to judge these guys' badass credentials, but I'm willing to believe some of them are the real deal. You know, like, some of them could have been supply clerks or whatever, who knows. But I'm willing to believe that some of these guys who say some of this shit are legitimate badasses who could, you know, probably beat me up or whatever. But they're still going to say this dumb shit, this dumb Naxalt shit, when nobody really denies that some women are, you know, minimally capable or minimally competent in certain narrow respects. But that doesn't mean it's a good idea to have any of them in there, in any of those roles. Okay? That's not the argument. We're not saying no women are minimally competent in a narrow sense for these roles, or all of these roles. We're just saying, you know, it's not worthwhile to have them in these roles, to let them in these roles, because they're more trouble than they're worth. And, you know, they're not the best candidates for these roles. Even if they are minimally competent in some cases, they're usually going to be the worst candidates for those roles still. So, you know, you're not missing out on much by just saying no. However, you always get some of these military guys chiming in and sticking up for some of these women. They never stick up for all women. They never say, well, yeah, any woman can do it, and I'd go into battle with any woman by my side. They always stick up for some, you know, few that they knew while they were in there or something. So, you know, as retarded as this is, are these guys our weakest guys? I don't think they're our weakest guys. Like, at least some of these guys are probably pretty badass and probably pretty smart in general, but they say some dumbass retarded shit, and I don't totally know why, but if you do, you know, maybe enlighten us in the comments below. But the point is, these are not our weakest guys. You know, they're probably moderately successful with women. You know, they might be married, they might have families, they might be reasonably alpha, you know, they might be reasonably self-assured and all this kind of stuff, but they're still going to say some of this dumbass feminist shit. it's not our weakest guys who are pushing this, who are enabling this. It is a problem that goes all the way to the top in every hierarchy you can imagine. And outside of hierarchies as well. Another source of this are man whores, players, men who are in, let's say, the top 20%, both of desirability to women and also libidinousness, and maybe in the bottom 20% in scruples, and men who are using the newfound sexual access that women's liberation grants them for personal hedonistic ends. Things that are not even ultimately benefiting them in an evolutionary sense, because they're not using that reproductive access for actual reproduction. Like, they're not even, spreading their own genes at the expense of society. They're just dragging our entire society down into the muck, and defending feminism and propagating feminism and, enabling feminism, for their own purely short-term hedonistic sensation-seeking aspirations. That doesn't even benefit them in an evolutionary sense, because they're not taking advantage of that reproductive opportunity for actual reproduction even. So they're not even being parasitic. It's worse than that, because they're just totally retarded. So again, though, these are not the pussy-whipped betas. These are not the basement-dwelling incels. Those are not the source of the problem in any which way that you look at it. So the issue isn't that we have too many weak men at the bottom of these hierarchies, or whatever criterion you're looking at. The issue is that the strongest men in every case, whatever you're looking at, status, badassity, wealth, influence, or just sex appeal. What the issue is, the top men in most of these fields, by most of these criteria, are the source of the problem. They are pushing this. They are enabling this. And I don't really know what to do about it, other than going back to a more aristocratic system where you're selecting a martial elite based on martial qualities, based on martial abilities, and constantly testing groups of these people against each other in actual martial contests, where bullshit is punished by defeat, right? I don't know any other way to cut this crap out than that. And I don't even know if that's going to be enough in a lot of cases, because it has, for example, infected the military to a large extent, and people who have been in the military are still infected with this shit, as I have mentioned. And, maybe that's just a consequence of America's commanding lead militarily, and that, they don't feel like they have to prioritize combat effectiveness, because they have such an advantage there that they can afford to give some of that up for, virtue signaling, or I don't know if they're scoring brownie points, or why they're even saying any of this shit. But they do. And so, my only suggestion would be to go back to more of an aristocratic system headed by a martial elite, selected for martial competence and not for other criteria that have proven more problematic and less helpful, intellectual or political or whatever, ideological, religious, verbosity and savvy, those kind of skills, or financial, merchant type skills. So yeah, if you like the channel, there's some links to support below. Smash that like button, smash that subscribe button, and I've got some exclusive content on my Patreon for my patrons. There's going to be a Q&A coming up later this week for my patrons, so hopefully I'll see you over there.